I'm Jerry Crow with the Pacifica Historical Society and today's host of Footprints of Pacifica. We get together once a week to discover and explore the lure and lore of lovely Pacifica, its character and characters. The focus of today's show is George Edsell, a longtime Pacifica businessman and a person who's been an eyewitness to many of the developments in Pacifica over the years, and has also participated in worldwide events. George, I'd like to start by discovering just how you came to Pacifica in the first place.
Well, I immigrated to New York in '57, and actually I'm a card-carrying wetback. I jumped ship in New York, having taken a single ticket to Bermuda. And I got a job there, sorted out my various affairs, lived in the village. And the west coast of the Americas is the only part of the world I'd never been to. So after I acquired a small grub stake, I set off west via Nevada and acquired a wife and wound up in San Francisco. And then I was going to be a lawyer, or intended to be, and you had to be a citizen to even take the exam in those days. It took 5 years. You had to be a citizen to be a broker. And so I took a job as a salesman in a company called Colvin, which had an office in Pacifica. And that's how my connection came, and I came to Pacifica in '58.
Shortly after incorporation.
Very shortly after incorporation, I was actually in the office, slightly before the incorporation, and was totally against it.
Well, my understanding is that you got involved in many things from the outset. Could you describe a few of your experiences in helping Pacifica grow?
Well, yes, in those days, you see, Pacifica, we only had, I think I'm right in saying there were 13,000 people here. And anybody who is involved in any sort of interest in the town got interested in everything. And I became a businessman. Eventually I became a broker in '62, I think it was, and opened my own office. And then became involved in politics. And I ran for office as a councilman in '68 and got beaten by Grace McCarthy, which was no disgrace at all because everybody liked her. And then I got put on the planning commission. And that was quite an experience for 4 years.
Then as now, it can be.
We sometimes met until 2 in the morning and various different things. But it was very interesting because it was really when the whole of what is now Park Pacifica, everything back from Rosita Road was totally wild in those days.
Well, you may have been involved in the hillside preservation efforts then.
I was actually one of the 3 people who started it. Mm-hmm. The idea originally, I forget how it originated, but it was with a number of people who wanted to preserve the scenic Pacifica, was what it was. And the Planning Commission was charged with trying to work out some sort of formula. I was involved in actually designating the mathematical formulae of houses and land. Les Clark, who was the planning administrator at the time, did the donkey work of fitting it into the general plan and the city as it was. And John Sherman, who was the city attorney, put it into legal language, as a result of which nobody's been able to understand it ever since. And
Which seems to have done the job, though. He intended.
Did an excellent job, yes. But it stood the test of time, and I think on the whole it's been beneficial to Pacifica. And it's something one can be, I suppose, rather proud of, yes.
Yes, indeed. And I understand also that you've been involved as an attorney, is it?
No,
assisting Pillar of Fire for some years.
Yes. I'm sorry.
Pillar of Fire.
Oh, the Pillar of Fire.
You have a
yes,
long time involvement with
The
them.
Pillar of Fire, it's very interesting. A chap came to my office wearing a clerical garb and asked me for a donation for his work he was doing. So I said, well, why should I give you anything? And he explained to me what he did and the fact that he had worked in Europe, in London, in a very rough area. So I gave him $5. And from that developed a friendship, and they were clients for many years. The Bishop White, who started it, he came from Denver.
Mm-hmm.
And of course they have schools. And I think the best thing that they did was they lent Whitefield to the city for something like 20 years. The city paid them $1 a year rent to use it as a sports field.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day, the then city manager thought that the city would like to annex it.
Whoops.
And that caused a first-class riot. That was one thing. I think another thing, a more amusing thing, of course, was the sewer service tax. Sewer service charge was put in, was $5 a year. I think it was a year. And it was put in by Grace McCarthy. And I can remember taking an ad in the Tribune saying, if you want to pay $5 to flush your toilet, turn up City Hall and argue about it. And the City Hall was absolutely packed to the eyeballs. And the politicians said, it's never going to be raised. And they spoke like accurate politicians. And I don't know what the sewer service charge is now, but it sure isn't $5.
And why don't you tell me a little about some of your favorite people in Pacifica over the years?
I suppose the first one would be Neil Tremaine, who was the first chief of police, who became a personal friend, and he was a first-class man. I think he was a Navy SEAL, I think. And he insisted on absolute professionalism and probity in the department. And I think that his influence has lasted right down to this present day. I think we have a first-class police department, and it always has been.
Yeah, we're very fortunate.
And we're very lucky to have it, yes, quite right. I don't know who else. Well, Grace McCarthy, of course, who was everybody's favorite.
Remarkable woman.
And I became involved with her, also with some of her real estate as well. And who else can I think of? Nick Gust. What can I say about Nick Gust? Nick Gust's been a friend for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And when he puts his hand round my neck and says, George, my old friend, I always sort of count the gold in my teeth to make quite certain it's still there when he takes it away again. Who else can I think of? Mildred Owen. Mildred Owen was in a wine tasting club that we formed.
Oh, well. Sounds like fun.
Yes, it was. We had there was Bill Drake and Kathy and Bob Powers, who was a surgeon in Pedro Point, and George Simon, who was Mildred's husband at the time. And we used to have quite a lot of fun. Yes, we tasted an awful lot of wine from time to time.
Well, they've recently named the concert hall after Mildred, so that her,
That's right.
her legacy will live on.
Right. And who else can I think of? Rick Romano, who ran the restaurant. His mother lived to be 98, and she lived in the little apartment above his restaurant. And I had to do some work for Rick. And because I've got a mind like a corkscrew, I always check the tax records. And I found that the parking lot alongside his restaurant was owned by somebody else. He nearly blew a fit. And because his father had bought it in 1928, as I discovered. But what happened was, I said, well, does your mother know anything about it? Does she remember anything? Well, I don't know. His mother spoke very poor English, so Rick translated. She passed us out of the kitchen, typical Italian kitchen with a deal table in the middle. And she pulled open a drawer, as I discovered later, and pulled out a deed dated 1928, signed by, I've forgotten who it was, with an X, because he couldn't write his name. And by the grace of God, it had been notarized. And I was able to use it. And then, of course, I had to identify her, because I was a notary at the time. And she'd never had a driver's license. And I used a passport issued by King Victor Emmanuel of Italy, dated 1910.
Now that's historic.
And that sorted that lot out.
They're finally regularized.
Finally regularized, yes.
Well, George, as well as your land activities in Pacifica, you've got a very rich maritime background. How did that begin in your young life?
Probably when I fell in a bathtub, I think. But in fact, on my 8th birthday, for a treat, I was taken down by an old family fishing friend who commanded a submarine, a wartime submarine, First War. And at that moment, I made up my mind I was going to be a submarine officer. I never looked back. And I come out of an army family, and I was supposed to go into the army. And my family sent me off to a Naval Reserve training ship, which was the roughest place I could be sent, to try and knock some sense into me and give up this wretched idea of going to sea.
Which I think we have a picture of her right here.
Yes.
Is that where you began, or was
that's
it?
where I began. Mm-hmm. I slung my hammock on the orlop deck. She was a 98-gun ship of the line, built in 1820. And that's where I started life, scrubbing decks.
Uh-huh. What was her name?
Conway, HMS Conway. And she was moored as a training ship, and I was here in the Mersey. And we learned seamanship and certain amount of navigation, of course, but basically my formal education in sort of Latin, Greek, and other languages and that sort of thing ended when I was 13.
When you went aboard?
When I went aboard, I put on a uniform at the age of 13 and was a cadet.
So they concentrated on nautical things.
Nautical things, yes. Navigation.
Agility in the
that's right,
aboard ship. I think we have a good photograph here of one of the exercises that one must become accustomed to.
Well, we had a mast like this ashore, actually, where we did sail training on. But on board, we had to go up this was the foretop, and the futtocks the futtock shrouds are here, and you had to hang out on, you can see a cadet here hanging on by his fingernails,
It looks a
and
little
swinging his
daunting.
legs out so as he could grab onto the rope here, and then you climbed up here onto the topmost shrouds, and then you had to come down the other side, and you had 2 minutes to do it in.
Oh, what if you don't make it in 2 minutes?
If you didn't make it in 2 minutes, you got a swift crack across the backside with a rope's end, which was literally true, because that's how the cadets enforced discipline.
Very convincing.
Cadet captains never did you any harm.
Another scene from the training ship.
That was my first term, and I was being taught knots and splices by the bosun, and I think that's me. I think that's me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure.
That knot looks exactly correct.
But it was
Lessons, I believe.
those are lessons, yes. In fact, I recognize that chap. He was an engineer, and we were learning engineering. And of course, in those days, they still had coal-fired ships, triple expansion engines, which was interesting. But another interesting thing in that photograph is you could see the deckhead beams of the old ships, and the mess decks, the mess tables were hoisted up into them, just as they did in the days of Trafalgar when you had to clear the decks for action.
Mm-hmm. They meant that
That's
exactly
exactly
when
what we
cleared
did.
The decks, yeah. This is
So that's when we were
hammocks.
sleeping in hammocks. We slept in hammocks, and there's a cadet captain here, I think, somewhere doing rounds. And as you can see, we had to have our shoes polished every night. We polished our shoes for turning in, and those were our sea chests. And I can see somebody's name on there. I can't read it from here, but we had a sea chest exactly the same as they were 100 years before.
And all your gear had to fit in there? Was that the
Everything
idea?
had to fit in,
Mhm.
yes.
And here she is. Oh no, this is.
So those are lovely boats. They were gigs,
Mhm.
and they were beautifully streamlined boats. And as you can see,
They look so.
we pulled them with a 14-foot ash oar, and it wasn't a bladed oar like there is now. It was flat ash,
Mhm.
and it was very heavy, I can assure you. But it was great fun.
So they typically race, I suppose, as well as use them for
That's right,
just
yes.
going to and from
Yes.
shore.
But they were actual naval gigs, and when I was sailing in Canada some years later, I found the backboard of one of them in an island being used as a backboard of a seat in a park.
Oh, really? Where the coxswain,
What?
where the coxswain sat, or the backboard being?
Oh, the backboard, not on the transom. It's the backboard this chap the coxswain was leaning on,
I see. Yes.
and it had the ship's name there, and that's how I recognized it, Ganges.
Nice artifact. Oh, here she is in 1932.
That's right.
I guess dressed ceremonially
Yes.
with flags.
Flags and everything. And you can see the old shipping, the old type shipping that ran up and down the port of Liverpool in the Mersey at the time. And that's a much better view of her.
Mm-hmm. So how old were you when you then entered the Royal Navy as an ensign?
I was just before I was 18. And you did a year's further training as a cadet, and then you joined the fleet, and I went out to the China fleet in the last commission, peacetime commission.
So you saw Hong Kong,
Hong
I
Kong,
presume.
Shanghai, Weihai.
Mm-hmm.
2 best years of my life.
Really? Were things fairly stable, or was there any excitement at the time?
Yes. I could go on a long time about this, because we still had gunboats up the rivers, and some of those old people they'd been on the China station for 27 years, and they ensured that the commerce was freed of the worst predations of the villages and so on. Every single one of which attached some squeeze to squeeze was the word that we used for everybody taking a little piece as they went down. And of course we had pirates too, and we did pirate patrol, and it amuses me now, the Somali pirates, because we did exactly the same thing on the China coast, and I noticed that the present ships are now defending themselves the same way that the Jardine Matheson and Swire boats, ships, defended themselves. They had barbed wire between the crew and passengers, paying passengers, and the Chinese passengers, so that they couldn't be taken over.
I see.
And it's being just repeated.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's be sure we cover the World War II experiences.
All right.
So tell me about the Seraph and your experiences with her.
Well, I meant to, first of all, the war broke out, and we were trying to round up German ships in the Pacific and so on. And our beat was round the island of Krakatoa. And we went round and round that perishing island for months. I could draw it in my sleep.
You were the navigator by this time.
Yes, it was the focal point of shipping coming through the Sunda Strait, mm-hmm. Which was the reason we were there. And we went down it forever. However, that was a beginning. And I joined the submarine service in early 41. And did my normal training, and then I've forgotten 2 or 3 patrols first, 3 I think, and then I joined Seraph, which you have now, which was a S-class submarine, which was building, so I was what is known as plank owner. Mm-hmm. And I was a navigator.
Like a founder, yes.
That's right.
Initial crew.
Initial crew, and I did a number of patrols in her. And the first we did was interesting because we were sent off to do a brief reconnaissance of Algiers, or the Algerian coast, or rather the Algerian coast round Oran. And did it fairly well, and so was selected next to do the mapping of the beaches of Algiers, which was what we did was we would take a fix and at the same time take a photograph through the periscope. And of course we were floundering around in about 60 feet of water or 70 feet of water, hardly enough to dive. And the French wouldn't tell us where the minefields were because the French had surrendered by this time. We were wandering through all these mined waters that we tried to avoid them somewhat naturally, and obviously did so successfully. But the cop parties that we had, who were the equivalent of SEALs, who also went ashore, and they got samples and all the rest of it. Next effort was to take General Clark and his party to try and persuade the French to come over to our side for the invasion of Torch, the invasion of Algiers, and which is the reason for this photograph you've got here, because
let me hold that up for the camera.
That's Seraph's crest here, and this is the story of what she did with landing General Clark and his party, one of whom was Lemnicher, a brigadier then, who became a commander-in-chief of everything, and Gerald Wright, who became a head, he was an admiral in the United States Navy later. And all these people remained lifelong friends. Mark Clark and particularly Gerald Wright. And after we'd got him in and out, and I might add that the navigating of that was, I was told to find a house with a red pitched roof and a single funnel, single chimney, I mean, on one side, and a light. And every perishing house on the whole North African coast had a red roof and a funnel on the side and a light shining somewhere. It was, but they had quite an adventurous time, and they were almost caught.
Well, they actually flew the American flag for a time on the Seraph, did they not?
Oh yes, we did. We to get Géraud out, because Géraud was a French general that was supposed to take charge of the French forces. He was a fine man. He was a splendid soldier, but no politician. But he wouldn't have anything to do with the British, because the British sank the French fleet, unfortunately.
Oh, yes.
And something that bedevils politics to this day. So what we did was we left Gibraltar and went round the corner to Cadiz, and we gave the ship a quick paint to American naval colours, and we rigged some canvas up between the periscope steers, and then sailed back to Gibraltar with an enormous American flag, which fooled nobody, and set off to find Géraud, which we did.
Well, George, I'd like to go on and on. This is
I'm sorry, I
most
talked too
intriguing.
much.
Not at all. No, a very adventuresome life. We'll just close off by reminding people, if they want to become active in the Pacifica Historical Society, they can contact us through the information on the screen. Or if you'd like to write to us, we have a post office box, 752 Pacifica, zip code 94044. And that's our show.
Are we now faded out?
Yes.
We're now faded out.